Still nothing on YouTube.
I think it's now just getting configured. Let me refresh and... Okay, I think we are live.
There. We're live.
Perfect. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge that the Indian Classical Music Society of Vancouver primarily operates on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Stolo communities. We pay our respects to the sacred land and her people and acknowledge our privilege to learn, explore, and express our traditional arts here. Sorry, hold on. I was just hearing my own voice there. So now I fixed that. Welcome, everyone. Today marks the second program of our Kalāvāṇī Festival. We had a brilliant workshop last week with one of my speech pathologists, Alana Turner, who gave us an introductory look into the mechanics of the vocal apparatus and how to engage with it with healthy singing habits. If you missed that program, it has been uploaded to our YouTube channel where you are checking this program out. So feel free to watch that after you watch today. For those joining in for the first time, the Kalāvāṇī Festival is a month-long celebration of the launch of the Indian Classical Music Society of Vancouver's education branch, Kalāvāṇī Institute, with an aim to provide an interdisciplinary approach to pedagogy. The festival seeks to introduce the Institute to the Greater Vancouver community through professional development, educational, and artistic initiatives. This festival is generously supported by CreativeBC and the City of Vancouver's Vancouver Music Fund Industry Catalyst program. We are extremely thankful as their funding has enabled us to provide all of our programming for this festival at no charge to the public. Today's panel will address pedagogy in Indian performing art traditions and features Srividhya Sairam, an all-India radio-graded Carnatic vocalist who is now here in Vancouver, Jai Govinda, a pioneer for professional caliber Bharatanatyam instruction here in Canada, Bageshree Vaze, an interdisciplinary dancer and a musician based in Toronto, and Sunny Matharu, a local Tabla soloist, accompanist, and teacher. Each of our panelists today come with different backgrounds in terms of their journeys as students and teachers, varying artistic disciplines, as well as their individual socio-cultural contexts. And today's panel is divided into two segments, the first focusing on their journeys as students, which will take about half an hour, and the second focusing on their journeys as teachers, which will take about an hour. Both segments will be focusing on addressing some key questions into pedagogical practice from both perspectives. For those new to the term, pedagogy is defined as the approach to teaching and learning in both a theoretical and practical sense. So on that note, I'd like to welcome all of our panelists here today, Bageshree Thai, JG, Sunny Bhai, Srividhya Di. Welcome all. I invite you to turn your cameras on and we'll get started with today's session. So lovely to have you all here. All right, so let's begin. Like I said, this first half is going to focus on questions around all of your journeys as students of this art form. It's often said that when you start learning any Indian performing art tradition, you're a student for your whole life. There's so much to learn. It's an endless ocean of wisdom, of knowledge, of practice, and of theory. So I'm very keen to understand your background as students and what you have noticed that has informed your pedagogical practice. So the first question that I have is, did you encounter any challenges or privileges in your learning, and how have you addressed these in your own pedagogy? I don't know if anyone wants to volunteer to start us off, or if not, I'm happy to pick someone from the list. Maybe Bageshree Thai, why don't you get us going?
Okay, thanks, Akhil. Namaskar. Thank you for inviting me to come into this discussion. I would have deferred to somebody older to me as an artist, Jai Govinda ji, but I'm happy to get this discussion going. This aspect of privilege when it comes to Indian classical arts is, I think, to begin with, it's a privilege that we are able to access them at all. These art forms of Bharatanatyam dance, Hindustani vocal music, Carnatic vocal music, all the classical art forms of India have gone through tremendous challenges in history, even to get to the point where we can access them today here in Canada or even in India. If you look at the history of colonialism on the Indian subcontinent, these were art forms that were actively denigrated. They were, they had the challenges of British colonialists who banned temple dancing at one point, and, Hindustani vocal music. All these art forms had to really struggle to stay alive without any patronage for several years, leading up to 1947, when the Indian government decided to define India through its classical arts, and then started supporting in a major way, in a way that has allowed all these art forms to flourish. So growing up in St. John's, Newfoundland, I came from a family that had a great love for Hindustani vocal music. Maharashtra is a home to many, a history of vocal music, and Pune in particular, the city in which I was born, has seen and spawned so many great artists in the history of Hindustani music. My father learned from his father, and it was not rare that any family in Maharashtra would have somebody in their family practicing Hindustani vocal music. But I have to say that it was not something imposed on me in our home. It was just, I was lucky to have it in the home, and it was the music that was played along with film music. Basically Indian culture was so much part of my childhood, and then it became in a big way when the St. John's Hindu Temple was established. And so in the early days of multiculturalism, the temple had gotten a grant to host a Bharatanatyam teacher twice a year to teach the community children about, as a way to connect them with their culture. And that was my introduction to dance. It wasn't that, I came from a family that had a lot of classical dance background, even though my mother had been dancing when she was growing up in East Africa. But I was very privileged to be introduced to classical dance in this way. I feel now, at the time, I think when growing up, especially at that time, we didn't have the tools of the internet and all the technology that we have today. To really understand, or have that connection with our culture. But at the time, I remember, we felt that, why are we growing up out here in Canada? We would feel like we belong more in India. It wasn't that we were experiencing racism or anything, but as you get into a classical art form and you realize how much there is to learn, that you can't just do it twice a year, and you just can't, have these little snippets of learning. I had this regret that if I'd grown up in India, I could have done it a lot more. So I feel that in itself, though, was a privilege that I had that experience as a Canadian to discover. And then I went on to study further later in Michigan, and then later in India. And I know that we all have time limits, so you want to stick with it. And so I feel like I've just started answering this question. But I know. What I want to say is that I think we're all very privileged even to have the chance to do these art forms.
I definitely like to circle back on this question if we have the extra time to later, because I think you brought up some really interesting points. One being the challenge and privilege inherent within the art forms themselves. And I think you've also touched upon the immigration story, right? The challenges that come also with people coming here, bringing the art forms over here, trying to find space for them to flourish amidst, a colonial land or a colonial, within colonial institutions. So on that note, I'd also like to field this question to JG, because I know you also have some unique perspectives on some challenges and privileges you've encountered as well. So JG, unmute, by the way. JG, unmute, please.
So the great privileges that I had was that none of my teachers ever charged me. My first Bharatanatyam teacher never charged me anything because I came from a temple living. I came from living in an ashram with no money, no resource at all. And she took me as a student and she never charged me a penny. To all my initial training was done like so. And then she brought back a guru to Montreal, U.S. Krishna Rao and Chandrabhaga Devi. Again, that was free from me. And when I went to study in India, I was very lucky that at that time you had the Indo-Canada Shastri Institute Fellowship. So I got it twice. I don't think that this fellowship exists anymore for the arts. And that enabled me to go study again with my teacher and not have to pay because I was on a scholarship. So this is a great advantage. And also an advantage in learning Indian classical dance was that I was already trained in classical ballet. I had 4 years of classical ballet under one of the largest and well-known institutions in Montreal, les Grands Ballets Canadiens, again on full scholarship. I never paid for any of my ballet classes. So those are all privileges. The other part that was more difficult is that I was a non-Indian coming into the field of an Indian performing arts. And I would say that it's not the Indian themselves that question my ability to learn or to understand the form, but it came more from when I came back from the Westerners who thought that if you're a white skin, there is no way you can learn and by an art form from South India. They still think, even today, that I'm dabbling in Indian classical dance form because they do not know the art form themselves, so there's no way for them to judge. As in India, they know the art form, so they know that you're not dabbling and that you are really serious about it.
That's a very interesting insight because I think it echoes also a lot of, at least what I've gone through as well, right? Where living over here, you potentially have people who are assessing, grants, who are assessing auditions of some kind, and they don't know the art form tangibly enough to make a conclusion as to how to assess you, right? Whereas again, back in India, or maybe over here, different Indian institutions which we may have for these performing art forms are better able to assess those qualities. Yeah. I think also, Sunny, if you have anything you want to input onto this question.
Sure, definitely, Akhil. First, I just wanted to thank you for inviting me on this panel discussion as well. It's always good to add something. There's been some great discussion already. Just one thing that I would like to add. Bageshree ji already touched on it, but it's a privilege, really like a big privilege, I would say, doing the music first of all. But I think also it's a privilege having a good teacher as well, because there's so many teachers that are out there teaching these art forms. And how do you go about finding the right teacher? And that's a really big question on students' minds, and not everyone is able to do that. So I think if you're able to find the right teacher who can actually guide you, hold your hand, take you, step by step through the process of learning this, really what it is a fine art. So if that's a really big thing, I think. And one of the challenges I would say is, here in the West, is that we really lack the environment, or the term that's used is the mahal, that we don't really have that here. And it's something that we have to really make an effort to create. And so that was, growing up, that was lacking. Fortunately for me, I had, my music was in my family, and pretty much everyone in my family sings except for my mom. I don't sing either, but and because they were singing, they got me into, they're like, oh, we need someone to play tabla. So then my dad, my dad got me into tabla, and so I'm very fortunate, that he guided me in that direction. And we also, like you already know, I think, we had Pandit Jasraj School of Music here, which was kind of like a boon, I would say, because, with Pandit Jasraj coming here, and with all the concerts that were happening here, that really, excited me. It motivated me to get involved, and not only me, but my sisters, who were also singing at the time. And so that mahal was happening, obviously not to the same extent that that's happening. It's happening in India, but nevertheless, whatever form it took, it was great. And I think it's still happening. It's up a little bit up and down at times, but I would say really that's one thing, is that challenge to create that vibe, that mahal, that environment here.
Yeah, and I think you also learn so much indirectly from an environment like that, right? By observing how your gurus behave, observing how other artists and musicians interact with one another, the casual stories that get exchanged, the anecdotes, right? There's a lot of learning that happens in environments like that, which over here we have to strive to create ourselves, and can sometimes be quite tough, because what I also notice is sometimes students who are just getting into learning these art forms, they don't recognize that all of that is also part of learning it, right? And, over here people have many other commitments. They have busy lifestyles that keep them away from engaging with the arts 24/7. So to create and sustain an environment like that can be quite tough. And I also like what you said about finding the right teacher, because sometimes we also don't know what to look for in the right teacher. And, we're also bound sometimes by things like gharanas and styles and expectations as well. So to really find the right person who can guide us for music, and in some cases also guide us in many other ways, if there's someone who becomes like a guru figure to us, that is something that's hard to discern at the learning stages as a student. Before I move on to the next question, I wanted to see if anyone had anything else they'd like to have. We still have a little bit of time left that I've allocated to this question, so if anyone wants to add a few more remarks in.
Yeah, I just wanted to say, I think also now the scene in India is very different from, the 80s, 90s. I also I was able to start going to India on the Shastri Indo-Canadian scholarships, and then later Canada Council, Chalmers grants. We have all those resources as Canadians to be able to access. Also I had some of the greatest masters that I was so lucky to learn from. But I'm really happy that I went at that time. And I would still go, even in this day and age, I would still go for all the same reasons that Sunny was talking about. in terms of mahal and just the level of activity, the level of how many performances you can go to in, every day, pretty much in Delhi. And that just boosts up your level just by seeing and listening, right? And that is such an important part of learning. It's not about how much time you have in class even. It's about all the concerts and all the listening and the watching that you do. But I have to say that I've seen in the last decade or so, the whole Instagram, Facebook culture has changed dramatically the way students now also interact with Indian classical arts. And there's so much narcissism that goes into just posting videos. And I think it's a very different scene now that the technology is a great thing, but I think it's also changed even the culture of how students are learning in India.
Really good points. I was just talking to my Guru Bhai today about trend culture, right? So a lot of what's happening now, for multiple reasons, artists should be promoting themselves and they should take advantage of what's out there, but you can also fall into the trap of trend culture, and that can, definitely inform your artistic practice and sadhana very differently as well. JG, I noticed that your hand also went up if you want to share some words. Unmute. There we go.
Well, in the time that I was learning, there was no videos, there was no YouTube, there was no computer. So everything you learn from your guru. Today, you can pick up any lyrics of any song you go, it's all there for you. Everything is facilitated. I must also say that students here, they're learning in a vacuum much more than when I was learning, because when I was in Montreal, every month we used to have a major Indian classical dancer coming to perform in the city, which here in Vancouver, there is none. The only people that were presented were by my festival, and I was not able to sustain it because of lack of funding. And I feel that, yes, you can. I urge my students, especially after Arangetram, to all go in India. If not to learn, I don't mind them learning with anybody else. I very often push them to other teachers, but to sit and watch and to see what's happening and what's going on, what our people are performing on stage, how it is presented, how it reacts. I feel that watching on videos is fine. You have a panoply of all kinds of performance, good, bad, irrelevant, that you can watch, but there's nothing like watching a live performance. And I feel that this is what is lacking now across Canada, which was there many years ago, even in terms of music. We used to have great musicians coming almost every second month, dancers. They were traveling across Canada. And it's not existing anymore. A lot of the locals are performing, promoting their own performances, their own students, but there is a huge lack of performing artists coming from India to perform in Canada, at least to my knowledge.
Yeah, no, it's definitely an observation I've had too. And when performing artists are brought from India, there's also opportunities for there to be, workshops for students who are learning here locally to see these art forms being presented, to understand what it means to perform them, and to get a chance to network and connect with these artists, which is really, really valuable. I like Sunny Bhai said, even my time at the Pandit Jasad School of Music, I had that opportunity, and that's what got me into concert organizing too, because there is a necessity for that to happen for students to learn better and understand better. All right, I'd like to move to the next question then. So the next one, and some of this has been talked about, but feel free to touch on it in different ways as well. But whenever you've gone to learn in India, or if you have been learning in India at any point, were there any obstacles that arose specifically from being from the diaspora or from not being South Asian? And you can also refute this, if there were none, and if in fact you were welcomed with open arms. And a follow-up to this that you can also tie in with answering that first question is, were there any lifestyle or cultural changes that you had to adjust to in order to take training? So Srividhya, why don't we start off with you, since we haven't heard from you yet?
Thank you, Akhil. Hello, everybody. And yeah, before I begin, I apologize a little bit for the background noise. There's some work happening here. I don't know why it's happening on a weekend, so sorry about that. Yeah, so to start with, I think it was really fascinating to listen to all your stories here. And for me, like, even though I grew up in India, but the thing was, I grew up in Delhi, so which was much far away from Chennai, which was the seat of Carnatic music. So up until the age of 17, I never knew that there existed a world with so much sabhas, kacheris, as in to say. So to me, music was just about learning. Like even though there were kacheris happening probably in Delhi, because I was not from a musical family, so I never went to a kacheri, and I never knew there were so many competitions that's happening. There's so many kacheris that you could go listen to. So to me, music was just my fascination, my romance up until that. So when I wanted to learn music full time, I moved to Chennai. And the lifestyle changes, I mean, it was really that enculturation aspect of, like, when you meet an artist, like, people say namaskaram or touch their feet. Like, I didn't know why they did that. And it didn't make sense to me because I never knew that existed. So I had to learn those etiquettes and habits and what it means to be a part of that fraternity. And I would say an obstacle, and I don't want to generalize this by any means. It's probably just my take on this, is that I think whomever I tried, because I came from Delhi and I didn't know how to, have those musical friends, so to me, it was always about, if I had to connect with someone, it was always about, okay, which competition did you go to? What prize did you win? Where did you perform? And, so all those kinds of conversations. So internally, I felt that if I was not doing anything externally, like performing or winning competitions or participating in that, I would never be able to connect with anyone. So basically, I think what I really missed or longed for is that close kind of a friendship, which was just based out of art. So to me, it was like more like work relationship. It was like, okay, you meet for a kacheri and then you play and then you're like, bye-bye. Okay. So it was very, very impersonal to me. And that's something that it really had to adjust with and like really get to know, okay, this is what the musical world means, and to be a part of that. So that's an obstacle that I faced.
Yeah, that's a really valid point, especially I think the cultural climate in India, there's a lot of musical competitions that happen, and that is how a lot of value is placed on artistry as well over there. Some of these points we talked about, if anyone watching tuned in for ICMS, one of ICMSV's last events, which was a panel on the film The Disciple, which came out. And in that film, they touch upon these aspects about the competitive culture that is there and what that means for people who are trying to learn the arts in India. So yeah, some really unique insights. And I think there's a little bit less of that here because obviously there are less competitions over here when it comes to things like Indian classical music. So that cultural climate is very different from that regard and over here. All right, I'd like to ask this question next to JG. I'll repeat it because it's been a while since I asked it. So learning in India, were there any obstacles that arose because of being from the diaspora or not South Asian? And were there any lifestyle or cultural changes you had to adjust to?
Well, the thing is that if you go to India for 1 year, and you have to find lodging. Lodging becomes very difficult to find, especially I was in Delhi. It was very hard for me to find a place. Thank God I had a few good friends who connected me. but there's sometimes that I live in a garage with rats walking over my head and with no fan under 52-degree weather in Delhi. So this can be difficult for some people, but that was not too bad for me. I managed. I could manage that part. I had traveled before. I had hitchhiked across the USA. So I knew this kind of lifestyle. I didn't mind that much. But what happens is that when you come for a certain period of time in India and you're coming to learn with a guru, and that guru is used to maybe teaching twice a week to a student, and then you come from abroad and you get to study with your teacher every day, you get a little bit of jealousy from other students. They say, why? Why is he getting all this time? What has he done to deserve all this attention? So you have a little bit of resistance from the other students who are learning from that same teacher, because they know that you're there for a certain period of time, that you have complete some work, that you have to go back to your country, you have to have recording, you have to have items that are ready to be performed. So there's pressure on the teacher to make sure that they deliver, and hence, to have the opportunity to go to a guru every day of the week. In India, it is very difficult. Not many students get this advantage. So you get a little bit of jealousy.
And I think also, like, when you're traveling out to India to learn, there's also a lot of like issues of costs that become associated that you have to worry about covering, especially if you're a budding artist or someone who's doing music full time. That can also provoke a sense of stress or anxiety in you to make sure that you're trying to make ends meet on that end as well. And that's something also that sometimes isn't recognized in India of the other end, in terms of how much that you have to.
There has to be sacrifice, right?
Yeah.
Whenever I left for 1 year, that means I would leave everything behind. I would close my apartment. I would sell my furniture, whatever I had, and I would come back. And when I would come back to Canada, very often, I would just stay in a room at some of my friends' place till I'm able to come up again. So wow. You have to. Fortunately, I was alone. I didn't have any wife or children or anybody under me to take care financially, so I could easily go with that lifestyle. But it obviously came with sacrifice. But at that time, I didn't see it as such. I was doing what I wanted to do. I was progressing in my art, and that was all that was important to me.
Yeah, very well said. Yeah. Well said. Sunny Bhai.
Yeah, so I think I was mostly, for me personally, I was mostly welcomed in open arms, and it wasn't too much of a challenge for me. I think one of the biggest obstacles was the first time for me to go to a place like Mumbai was such a culture shock, that, on the on the same stretch of road, you're seeing a Lamborghini go by, and then a person that's barely making ends meet on that same stretch of road. And it was just, a big shock for me. But, specifically as to, the teaching, I think, again, this is not to generalize or anything, but I think there's also just a certain perception that, other students or people in, who are learning, that they have of, students coming from the West. And it's not to point a finger at anyone, but I think it's just a thing with Westerners maybe not having that etiquette, or not having the certain mannerisms that are required. And it's to a certain degree, it is true, because many students that are going from the West, they don't have any knowledge, or they don't have that awareness. An example for me was like the first time, and this was like a learning experience for me as well. I was pretty young, and I walked into a tabla shop where the tabla makers are making their the tablas, the skins and all that. And it was a mistake on my part, and I walked in with, I totally just forgot, because I was so excited and I wanted to see how the tabla was being made. And I walked in with my shoes, and then right then and there, the tabla maker's like, get out. You can't do that. You have to take your shoes off before coming into the shop, and so something like that wasn't it was a learning experience for me. So there's certain small little things that are overlooked by students from here going from the West. And I think whereas students there, they already know this because it's part of the culture, it's part of the tradition, right? So for me, that was coming over these small little obstacles was the main thing for me. But generally, I had a really good experience, learning from my teacher, whom I'm still learning from, right? So that's all I really have to add, I think.
Yeah, and I think what you said also kind of ties into your last point about the mahal, right? Like
Yeah.
these subtleties, these unspoken sanskars, right?
Yes.
You pick up on them when you're in that learning and type of learning environment. And if you don't have that, it's really hard to even see those things as something you need to learn, or that are embedded within the cultural practice
Right.
of these art forms. All right, Bageshree Tai.
Well, life is tough, right? Everybody likes to look at their own plight and challenges, but I think we're all pretty privileged people. It sounds like everyone's, nobody has been on refugee boats and capsized at sea and having to fight for survival. There are a lot of assumptions on both sides that, people in India have, you can understand that, having had relatives who lived in India who assumed that if you grow up in the West, you have all this money. And they're not wrong, because the living standard has been, especially in the 80s, when they didn't have all this, a TV in every household or even in the slums. So, there's a certain aspect of poverty that will make people also want to take advantage of what they call NRIs. Definitely a challenge has always been, I have never known a scenario where people didn't expect you to pay 10 times whatever the local price for class fee would be. But I also didn't spend a lot of time actually in classes getting spoon-fed. I think if you want to learn an art form, it's not about, you want to learn from the best, but you really have to teach yourself. And a lot of what you learn is what you teach yourself. And so I was just really lucky to be exposed to it. Living on your own in Delhi, especially as a woman, is pretty much impossible. Forget about being a white man. But for women in India in general, especially to find a place on your own, if you can't get a spot in a women's hostel, you have to find with a family. There's all those challenges, and then there's dirt and the traffic and the population. But again, I think if you really want to do something, and if you really love an art form, it becomes about that art, and you will do whatever you have to. And you're not going to care if people have welcoming. It's not a Disney experience, okay? So, but at the same time, if you work hard, it's about sadhana. And any guru is going to see that if you have talent and if you're willing to put the hard work in. I've encountered any number of foreigners who are, this is a thing, as being Indian, but living here as an NRI, you're kind of in this in-between place that people are not willing to necessarily take you seriously, or they think you're rich and you have all this money. But then you can see white people or foreign students who get like starved treatment, right? So it's interesting listening to these challenges. But as I said, I think that if you really care about the art, it doesn't really matter.
Yeah. I think a lot that has been echoing is that, the art takes the forefront, that no matter what you encounter, no matter what is affecting you at any level, if you focus on cultivating your artistic practice, you're able to make it. You're able to get where you need to go. You're able to learn how you want to learn. and get the resources you need. I really like what you said too about assumptions, both on our end, if we're wanting to go to India, assumptions we may have about people there, about the cultural climate there, and assumptions in return that, we get also put onto us. And I guess the key fix to that is just our own localized interactions with people when we go there, and cultivating those kinds of connections and relationships that can prevent assumptions of those kinds. Wonderful. Thank you all for your answers. We'll move to one more question in this round, and then we'll move over to the teachers' perspectives. So what's an observation that you had as a student that provoked a response of, this could be done differently? So this is a really interesting question. I'm excited to see what you all say about this. So let's get started with JG. Oh, unmute.
Can you repeat your question?
Yeah. So what's an observation you had as a student that provoked a response of, this could be done differently?
It's very hard to answer without being disrespectful. But I've found that very often teachers in India, they're used to teach one way. And I think that when you talk about pedagogy, that you learn to dovetail your way that you're teaching according to the students. And this is where the old tradition, the old guru, this is their way or no way, which is very different. And I think that very often they lack patience. So they're very impatient. They want you to get it now and the way they want you to get it. So they're not willing to just do this to the loop so that you learn. I'm sure it is changing now. We're talking, I'm 66-year-old. So I was there some 35 years ago. So things have really changed. And I can see that the teachers now, because the teachers now very often of today, they had a long extended career in the performing art as dancers themselves. Whereas the old guru in the past, a lot of them didn't perform that much. As a matter of fact, some of them, the Natuvana, never learned dance at all. They knew how to teach, but they didn't know how to dance. So, and I think that the new school today of teacher is made of people who had a long performing career. So they can understand the obstacle that you might have in learning because they went through it themselves.
Yeah, I think, those points make a lot of sense. I've also experienced a bit of that myself. I'm sure most people have. And I think also, again, when you're not learning in an environment where you're constantly around your gurus and you're only seeing them in India, once a year or something like that, it becomes really hard to adjust to that type of teaching style and to learn everything so quickly. Like you said in your previous point too, the gurus are also expected to deliver on certain things, so they have that pressure on them to get you learning as much as you can before you go back home. And in return, you have that pressure on yourselves to absorb as much as you can, as quickly as you can, so you can just move on to the next thing. Yeah. All right. Bageshree, same question.
Yeah, well, it's become kind of the my raison d'etre to say, it basically, I always had this challenge, something I did not like and I do not like that still exists, is the system of dependency that exists, this idea of ownership, whether it relates to that you can only learn from this one teacher, and you have to have this allegiance, and all these rivalries and egos that exist. It's funny because we're watching this show Cobra Kai, and they use karate, but I feel that there's so much of that show that if you inserted Indian classical dance or music, it could be the same thing. And I think the movie The Disciple kind of alludes to it to a certain degree. But this aspect of not having music to dance to, was something that was the biggest impediment, as I started performing Bharatanatyam when I was like 12 years old, is that you had these recordings that were given to you by your teacher, if they were given, if the teacher allowed it, and they were poor quality. If you wanted to have high quality recorded music that you wanted to perform with, you had to spend lots of money. The sense of agency was not there because you would have to hire musicians. Your teacher would have to dictate what the music was, what the choreography was. And so at some point when I kept going on, learning Kathak dance, I've gone through my journeys of learning different dance styles, as well as vocal music. And I just decided I said, I don't like this system, so let's just break it. And so this aspect of owning music for dance, I decided to use my knowledge of music, all the music that I was learning. I mean, I also learned from specific teachers because I wanted to learn music for dance and to somehow create music. And so I started doing that 15 years ago with my album Tarana, in which I adapted certain taranas and certain bandishes that and recorded them the way that they could be performed in dance, whether that was for Bharatanatyam or for Kathak. And so I'm very happy to say that all those recordings are accessed digitally because we have this technology. This is one of the tools, and used by dancers around the world. So you can go on YouTube and you'll find any number. So, I know that this is something of controversy because people are, a lot of teachers don't want their music to be used by other people, but I just don't believe in that. And I hope that this changes the story of how dance artists can have that sense of agency of taking a piece of music and then doing and being a performing artist.
A lot of that echoes in Hindustani music, at least in terms of bandishes. So, what bandishes people are given access to, and how sometimes, some bandishes are just kept away from people and are not shared. And then you see that sometimes those bandishes die out, and then no one, ends up practicing them because they've been held so tightly, out of whatever reasons it may be. So
the only reason behind any of this is simple human ego.
Yeah. Very aptly put. Srividhya.
Yes. Thank you, Akhil. It's a very fascinating question. It made me think. So when I moved to Chennai, I was like barely out of high school, and I was not from a musical family. So I felt a little lost, as in, okay, what kind of a world is this? What is musical world? And learning all those things. So to me, one of the things was I literally did not know anything about what are some of my pathways ahead in life. Like, should I just be a performer? Should I just be a teacher? Like, those two were the only things that were showing up. But to me, I would have definitely liked to, like, for example, that's one thing I like about the universities here, right? When I came here, moved out of India, I saw like there are so many exchange programs, and then there are so many programs like, okay, you can take a course from this university, you can do your research in music, connecting music and psychology. So to me, all those were like, wow, I can be a musician, but I don't have to necessarily be a performer or a teacher. Like, what are some of my other career pathways? So that to me was, I didn't know. I didn't have any resource at that point. So to me, what I wanted differently was, maybe having those outlets for career counseling. Really, what can I do with my music? And the second thing, which, as I touched upon earlier, was those peer connections, about connecting, without having an agenda of, okay, are we going to perform something? No, making those friendship, having those really social support groups where you're connecting for the sake of art, and not just from a very a business-oriented perspective, as in, you're connecting for a reason. So to me, those were the two things I would say that stood out for me when I was a student, that I would definitely want things to be changed.
Yeah, I think you've brought up a really good point in terms of professional opportunities for those who learn these art forms really only being categorized into performer and then teacher. Like there's so many other things that could be there and that are there, but they aren't inherently provided or given as opportunities, such as like being an archivist, going into research of numerous kinds, like you said, connecting other disciplines with the art forms that you are learning, curation, production. These are all different things, and I think people do end up encountering these as different professional disciplines at some point. But like you said, it's nothing that is more clearly stated at the beginning. There are no professional development resources or opportunities available, especially for those domains. There still aren't many for teaching or performing itself too, but for those other things, it's much less as well. All right, wonderful. Well, this brings us to the end of our first section of the panel. I know we're a little bit over time, but we'll make up for that on the second end of the questions. So now we're going to be shifting to everyone's perspective as a teacher. So the first question that I have to start us off with this is for everyone to just provide some insights into your teaching journeys. How did it begin? What have you set out to accomplish? And has those goals that you set out to accomplish, have they changed over time in any way? So Sunny Bhai.
Sorry, Akhil, did you say how did the musical journey begin, or this as a student or as a teacher?
As a teacher, yeah. So how did your teaching journey begin? Yeah, and provide any insights you may have into that.
Yeah, I think for me, it wasn't anything that was planned. It just kind of it happened by itself. I was at the time I was learning from my first Guruji, and he told me that, look, you should, you're at the point now where you should start taking on some more younger students, and so this is what I did is I started teaching. Really, I was really open to teaching anyone, but I was getting many young students, teaching them, and then at the same time my own learning was happening, and so I kept that up, because many a times certain students get to the point where they're like, oh, we don't need to, or musicians think they've learned all that they've had to learn, and then they just stop learning, and they just focus on one aspect, which is just performing or teaching. But for me, I thought it was important to teach, and also be a student at the same time, because this is really a never ending journey, learning. And so in the beginning, I was just I was at the time I was also doing my schooling as well. I was in university, and so I wasn't really focusing so much on the teaching. But ever since I've started learning from my current Guruji, Yogesh Samsiji, I've really adopted his techniques of teaching, because there's a very structured and logical approach to his teaching style, and he has really set a curriculum up for taking a student from scratch all the way up to an advanced level. And so I've adopted that style, and I haven't really looked back since, because it's something that it really resonates with me. And to this day, I'm teaching students that curriculum, and I walk them through that curriculum, because it makes perfect sense to me, I think. And as a result, you can see that in the students, because when they're playing and when they're improving, there's that certain satisfaction you gain as a teacher, and students are also gaining that too. And so for me, it's been, I think, about, I can't even remember, but I think it's like at least 20 years since I've been teaching. And it's been a good journey. There's been certain roadblocks to that. There's been certain things that got into the way of me teaching. I also have family life and all that stuff too. But it's been an excellent journey for me.
And I think there's something to be said too about, in the process of teaching, you learn so much as well, right? So like you said, you learn how your guru has envisioned their curriculum. You learn what it means to then teach someone that, and see someone grow as well as a result of that. And then, like you said, you get that sense of satisfaction, and you grow as well in the process. Bageshree.
Well, just like my education in dance or music, I don't think I ever followed any kind of curriculum learning. And I certainly don't think I would follow any curriculum teaching in that sense. But I wouldn't have, I haven't followed the model even like as Sunny or JG, in terms of having a certain phase as a student and then, having this vision of having a school and students. I never wanted that. I never wanted the academy of classes in the suburbs. And I started teaching when I was like 12 or 13 in the Bharatanatyam class, because I would have to teach the younger students. And then when I went to Michigan to stay with my Bharatanatyam teacher, she would be busy, so I would end up teaching her classes. So, that's how I became a teacher, where I started teaching. And so I don't think of learning and teaching as two separate things. It's just part of who I am as an artist. And, if anybody wants to learn and has that desire and is sincere about it, I would teach them. I've gone on to teach in several schools as a guest artist. And right now I'm at a point in my career and in my life where, I feel that there are enough schools out there. Every time I look around, there's another Kathak teacher, there's another Bharatanatyam school, and even singers and for music. And so I think that's been there. It's going great. There are all those resources. But what really needs to happen is that for dance training curriculum in the dance training institutions, and I would say the same thing for music, they have to integrate styles such as Bharatanatyam, Kathak, Odissi into what is considered the mainstream pedagogy. Because if you look demographically at all of us, at what has been happening for the last 30, 40 years and the size of the South Asian populations, it doesn't make sense that major training institutions have only ballet or contemporary or Western forms. They have to feature, that has to be part of the mainstream dance training curriculum. So that's, I've been working with the School of Toronto Dance Theatre now. That's just in the last couple of years that these institutions have realized that they have to. It's not that they even want to do this, but they have to. And so that's where my focus, if I'm doing any teaching, it goes into that.
Yeah, I love your point about learning and teaching not being separate things, right? And I think you've also hit something on the nail, which is that living over here, we're living in an environment where there are tons of different ethnic, cultural groups that have their own arts and culture disciplines that they come with and that they contribute over here to the general cultural landscape that we have. And that needs to be acknowledged in institutions that are said to be, generically dance institutions or generically music institutions, because if they're defining music and dance just to be a certain thing or certain specific forms, that also is incorrect, right? And it doesn't represent all that is here encompassed in the population of our diverse communities we have here in Canada.
Yeah, because, even for a dance training institution, a professional training institution, which isn't just weekend classes, if you're looking for new students, then presumably you're imposing ballet or contemporary dance, or the same thing with Western classical music. You're imposing that if you want to be a professional, you have to, that's the style, that the aesthetic you have to work in. So then you're also limiting the population that wants to learn that.
Yeah, very well said. On that note, I'd like to go to JG next for this question, because I know JG, you've been doing work with the Dance Center as well, and Bharatanatyam classes, professional development opportunities, as well as performances have been happening there under your guidance and your curation at Mandala. So I'll just repeat the question because it's been some time since I've said it too, but just provide some insights into your teaching journey, how it began, goals that you set out to accomplish, and so on. And unmute, please.
Mute and unmute. I began my teaching, my first teaching job. I was 17. I was teaching ballet jazz for a summer camp out of Les Grands Ballets Canadiens. And teaching has been a means for me to survive and continue my art form, to be able to dance, because performing just to make enough money to pay for an apartment just with performances in Canada, forget it. I was lucky that at least I perform almost every month, but still not enough to make a living. So teaching was a way to make a little money at that time. So I started teaching that way and it became more serious as I started to perform less and less. Now, throughout, I want to say that throughout my career, I've performed in different dance curriculum of university, dance school, Cirque du Soleil, École nationale of theater, Les Grands Ballets Canadiens, all those, even in BC, SFU dance department, modus operandi training program, main dance, where they invite me for about 15 days to teach. But you have to understand that their curriculum is already loaded. And most of their students are there to learn the more westernized European dance style if they want to join a company, an existing company in Italy. So we come in as an addition to expose them. Their curriculum is already, those kids are loaded up to there. And also there are quite a lot of differences in dance style. Ballet dancers don't want to stamp their feet on the ground because they've been trying for the past 5 years to point their toes. So there's also physiological component that they don't like to do. I think that a lot of schools have been trying to expose them, but whether Indian classical dance is going to be part of a full curriculum in Canada of dance, I doubt it. There's one school that succeeded with that. That was the school of Maurice Béjart in Belgium. And as a matter of fact, he called his school Mudra till today. And he had Savitri Nair coming to teach Bharatanatyam as part of the curriculum. And he created ballet called Bhakti and many things that are influenced by Indian classical dance. But you have to understand that even Indian classical dance in itself is a whole lot to learn. So it's a whole time of dedication. And to enter into an existing dancing program, you know that you're going to be an invited guest and something that they're going to flirt with and they're going to expose themselves with, but they're not going to want to do that totally. I've given lecture demonstration. I make it a point to be at the dance center, as you mentioned, so that not only people see that this kind of teaching is going on, that I'm not teaching in a garage and in a suburb, but I'm teaching downtown. And the ballet company, they walk by the window and they see all those little girls and boys sometimes training, and that my students see that there's also other kind of training in other dance form. There was the National Ballet who introduced a flamenco, and that became an Academy Award movie, Flamenco at 5:15. I don't know if any of you have seen this movie, but it won an Academy Award. And it's about this lady who will come and teach flamenco for the National Ballet dancer after they complete their curriculum activities. So it was a parascholar activity. And the movie is very, very beautiful. So if you want to see how this can be done, it can also be done. So it's a loaded question that I think that you have to exist on your own, whether it's like us. Will I ask my students to learn ballet on top of all that I have to teach them? I don't think so. I let them do if they want. If they want, I said, please go and take a ballet class. But I cannot bring it into my own curriculum that is already so loaded and they have difficulty even to cope with. So you have to understand the balance in between those two. And I'm still open, I still give workshop. And this is why pedagogy comes in. I mean, that probably going to come in another question. I've spoken enough, so I'll cut it there. But when we come to the level of pedagogy and how to teach, and especially for people who are not there to learn the art form from A to Z, what are the tools that you have to use to pass on whatever you can?
Yeah. What was the name of the movie, by the way, that you had mentioned?
Flamenco at 5:15.
Flamenco at 5:15. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, I think what you said, I also see something that ties into what you mentioned before about, let's say Western dance or music institutions here also not knowing what to assess or what to look out for, because again, these art forms are very foreign to them, and perhaps to a certain degree they can understand what looks good, what doesn't look good, or what sounds good and what doesn't sound good, but the nuances of all that get lost in translation. So I do definitely see your point about, also just for us as practitioners of these art forms to also make our own space, about how we teach them, about the caliber of teaching that is delivered, but also working with these other institutes to expose them to these art forms, to provide, resources and to educate them as well when there is that lack of knowledge or that ignorance that might be there about these art forms. Like you said, it's a very hard thing to balance, and it is something that has a lot of nuance to it. I know, Bageshree, you wanted to follow up with some things?
I have to disagree, because I think exposure, like, that's already been happening for 30 or 40 years. And now, decolonization is something that has become really, really urgent. And, yes, it's not that these training institutions have necessarily wanted to do this. And it's not about, expecting ballet trained contemporary artists to suddenly learn Bharatanatyam. Of course, that's very difficult. But if they're going to offer a training program, they have to offer all those courses as part of the curriculum. It's not just one-off workshops, because then if you have presumably even students who have been training with Jai Govinda ji who want to become professional dancers, they can look at those training programs and say, oh, yes, there's a Bharatanatyam component. And, this is something that's happening. It's whether it's flamenco, Bharatanatyam, Kathak, Odissi, this is happening. Ballet and contemporary dance in Canada is waning. It's not going to be the predominant culture anymore. It has that, Montreal, Quebec is a separate realm, but they know this. It has been happening for the last decade that they're losing their funding. That it's not going to be they don't have the demographics behind them. So it's not a question of if, it's a question of when.
JG, I don't know if you have any other points that you want to add, and if not, I'll go to Srividhya.
No, I've tried, for example, Arts Umbrella. I have a training program, and the director of Arts Umbrella program, every time she meets me, oh, you have to come and teach. Oh, you have to come and teach. Their program is already so loaded. As you said, Bageshree, maybe the aesthetic gonna change, but whatever we see on stage in terms of creation, in terms of main dance company, is very much Eurocentric. And even the Indian classical dancers who are trying to be more contemporary are going into a Eurocentric way of presenting themselves. And if you ask for grant, and if you say that, oh, I'm contemporary, I do Bharatanatyam, they don't get it. They think that you're doing Bharatanatyam. It has not, because contemporary has become in dance the name for a style of dance, which has some aesthetics, as opposed to contemporary being whatever you do today. And I'm a Bharatanatyam today, and I choreograph today, and what I choreograph is contemporary, is not what my teacher taught me, is what I see, and it's my own aesthetics. But try to say that to the jury founders.
No, but it has changed, because these conversations have been happening. And the trick is that we cannot tolerate anymore that kind of level of Eurocentric programming. And it isn't. They are losing. Trust me, they are.
I hope so.
They are.
I've been on many jury for Canada Council.
No. I know. I have this. I have the same experience.
And you listen what's going on and said, "Oh my God."
Yeah, but since 2020, now they can't say that stuff anymore, and it's up to us to not stay on the periphery and not tolerate it.
Let's see.
You can leave it with me. Leave it with me. It is happening. If I do it single-handedly, it's happening.
Srividhya, we haven't heard from you yet on this question.
Yeah.
Again, it's been a while, but just a little bit of background on your journey in teaching.
Yeah, thanks, Akhil. I think my journey into teaching also started just like how Jai Govinda ji mentioned. Like it seemed like a natural progression after I graduated from Kalakshetra with my music degree. It was like the next thing I didn't quite know which path I had to take. It was either performing, and I was also performing on the side, but I started teaching. To quickly summarize, I think from when I started out, it was not, I was not quite a self-reflective teacher, in that I was just 21 years old. I was just started and I was just teaching things like, and with Carnatic music, it's more like compositions, right? So you're like teaching those compositions with those sangatis, I didn't have advanced students at that point. So I think my teaching kind of grew with my music, with my understanding. Like I was also growing as a musician, and then I still am. And my teaching ability was also growing at the same time. And once my music started growing, I started understanding my own connection, the depth of my own connection with my music, which started to create some tensions in my teaching. Because as I grew more as a musician, I started to quite disagree with things that didn't sit well with me in the way I wanted to express my music. And when I wanted to teach those things, then there was a kind of a discord between the musician that I was becoming to the teacher that I was. So at that point, I had to take a bit of a break from teaching, and that I had to give up teaching for a bit, because I needed that space to really experience my creative process, to really understand what is it that I want to express, and what do I really want to teach, and what is it that I'm looking to teach in the first place. So, and also the more and more I think about it now is that, like for example, the other panel members here, you all talked about how it was, you from the West went to India to learn. To me, it was with respect to teaching, it was the other way around. It does. I was completely groomed in India. I grew up in India, and then I came here, and then I started teaching here. So to me, it was like having students from here. There was a bit of an adjustment phase, I would say. Like I had to really understand where the students were coming from. Like for example, when I was teaching, and then I've had students say to me, you know what, it's already 55 minutes and we have to go. So to me, I probably would have never said that to my guru, in the sense that I would be, my guru is talking something, so let me listen. And that's one of the privileges I had, in that my guru would never look at the time when she was teaching, or I would probably just be there for hours together. So to me, it was a switch that had to happen, as the students are also we need to be cognizant of the time, and it's not just because I'm a teacher, I can't like, keep on talking or something. So then that I started questioning as to if I really have to develop a meaningful relationship with my student, and it has always been important to me to have, regardless of a student or an artist that I'm working with, or I need to have much more than the art, in the sense that I need to know their context. I need to know what their ideologies are, what they stand for. So I want to have those conversations with the student. It's not like a student just comes in and you do sapasa, you do your Sarli Verse, and then that's it. No, then it's not transformative in any way for me, neither for them. So, and then once I started thinking about all these, then I'm really at a point where what kind of a student, what kind of a teacher I want to be, and what kind of a student do I want. So it has to be both ways, and it's a very special bond, and that student has to be receptive and curious, and the teacher has to be giving. And how do we find that balance in today's time? That's what I'm thinking. Right?
Yeah, and I think what your answer has indicated that is teaching is also a creative process, right? How we envision how we teach, what we are teaching, how we observe the students who are coming to us, and understanding what their needs are, what their temperament is. All of these things factor into how you teach, and you have to have time sometimes away from teaching to really think through that properly, so that when you get back into it, you feel better off with how you are interacting with your students, with what you are giving them, and in return to see how they respond to your actions as a teacher. So I think that segues really well into my next question, which is, how have you envisioned your teaching methodology differently from your gurus and your instructors, and in what ways is it similar? In what ways have they influenced you, and in what ways have you found your own ground as a teacher? So I'd love to start this question off with JG.
Okay. The curriculum remains the same. I mean, Bharatanatyam is an art form. You have to learn your ABC all the way till the last letters. So your hand gesture, your footwork, your tala, your all this, and so on. It's the way to pass it on that changes, and that varies according to whom you are teaching. And of course, the teaching of dance, and especially Bharatanatyam, includes philosophy, mythology, and not all the students come with that luggage. And it is very important for me to make them understand. So there's all kind of analogy, metaphor that I use to teach. And if they don't understand this way, I try the other way. So I try the many ways to modify the teaching so that they can understand. It also depends how much time they're spending with you. As you said, Srividhya, my last class that I just teach today is supposed to be an hour class. It's always 2 hours, because I speak in between, I explain in between, I give analogy, I go, depending. Today I was speaking about Kathak, because Kathak has this dimension where the dancers come and sing the Solokatu on a microphone, which is the only Indian classical dance style that does that. But my students do not know. I said, have any of you seen Kathak? No. If they've seen it with recorded music. So they don't know all the pizzazz and all the showbiz that exists with Kathak, that the dancer come and sing, or they have a jugalbandi, an interaction with their musician, and then they go and they do this. So today, I don't know how, but this came on the platform. So there's always something new that you can inform. And I think you have to be open, and you have to be patient, and you have to know who you are teaching. If you know that the students are going to be with you for the next 8 to 10 years, And if you know that you're in front of a group of students who are there for 15 hours and you'll never see them again, so obviously your teaching is going to be very different, right?
Yeah.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think it does.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like you said, tailoring what you are disseminating, what knowledge you are providing, and how you are providing said knowledge to your students is tailored according to each student and
And of course,
individual
if you teach a
temperaments.
group, you cannot teach to the most advanced or to the one who has hard time to do the step. So you have to pitch it in the middle so that the one who's very good at it still is getting something, and the one who's not so good can still be getting something. So you have to drive your teaching right in the middle so that they can both, get something out of it.
Yeah.
That's for group classes.
Yeah. Bageshree Tai?
Wow, I mean, that sounds very challenging. Like I know from the few students I have had over the years, I mean, that's the biggest challenge, like what Srividhya was saying, that, people here, if you're not doing it full time, it's very difficult to, structure is good that you schedule an hour and a half, because, we all have to schedule our lives. But these are not things that you can, like you have to give the time that it requires. With this aspect of padant, or as you called sholakattu in Kathak, even I've seen when it comes to teaching Kathak here, or to young children especially, a lot of people have had to modify. It's just too difficult to teach that to certain dancers who just want to press play on, and because they just want to dance, right? And and I mean, even in Bharatanatyam, though, I mean, you do have to be able to say all the sholakattu of all your thirmanams. I mean, that is part of your training, which I know even when I was growing up, it just was not possible for my teacher to teach that to everybody, because everyone's levels were different, and so it's only when I went to India that I understood how, like, even in vocal music, you have to be able to hold the tal at the same time of singing. And, with the tools of the electronic tabla now, people have become very lazy. And that's something that and that's something even I would, like, I have to make sure that I don't lose that practice, or that I practice a certain way. But I think that it's very difficult with students here or anywhere who are not doing it full time. If they have a certain intention that they just want to learn it as a side thing, that you have to look at that student and just think, okay, how can we maximize the time that we do have? And then, like Srividhya, you have to ask yourself, do I even really want to do this? And my answer would be no. So I will just be like, yeah, if this is just something that you want to dabble with, and I'm not the right teacher for this. And because it's really, really hard. And, cultural aspects, like even yesterday when I went to go and teach these contemporary dancers, but even one of them, she's a Bharatanatyam dancer. I walk in and they're all like sitting with their legs spread out and eating M&Ms, right? And I mean, you can't even fathom that we would ever do that when our teacher is coming, right? So, there's just certain expectations that you have to let go of if you just don't want to go insane, basically.
I think what you said, everyone digests the information that you teach differently, and everyone also has their own, like you said, some people might be taking this as a hobby. Some people might want something more from it, or maybe they just don't know as well. Sometimes that happens too. It often happens. So understanding, again, what the student needs. I think it echoed a lot of what JG said too, right? About tailoring it to the student, and also understanding what your expectations are as a teacher, not compromising on them. That's also very important, because everyone has different expectations. They have different goals that they want from their own teaching too, and it's important that students then know what to find in a teacher in accordance to that. Srividhya?
Yeah, sure. So this is the question that how I'm envisioning my teaching practice. So I think I would just say 4 points that just came to my mind. I would be happy to elaborate them later. So few things that I've done is the first thing I would say, I did make some rooms for, I call it thinking classrooms or talking classrooms. Like when I was learning, there used to always be like you go and then you like kind of learn and not talk much with your guru, and then there's some kind of an inhibition, like okay, would something go wrong if I ask something? But I think to me, that was something that was important for me as a teacher, in that I need to open up the space for a student to ask questions without inhibition. So that's something that I've really worked on, to create that trust in them, and to just make sure, okay, even if it's like there are no silly questions, so just talk and just ask, even if it's like, just a very, very basic question, just make sure you're asking it out and always answering that. Second thing is like the things that I'm doing differently, like, involving parents in some sense. Like when I was learning, like I never have even heard like my mom or my parents calling my guru and asking, okay, how is she doing? Or because my parents were like, yeah, your guru knows well, like, we don't know anything, it's up to you and your guru. So they had that complete trust. But now it's more like it's a weekly class, and how do we monitor what the students are doing, how they're practicing? So I used to make it a point to like call the parents like every month or so, once in 2 months, just to make sure, just asking what they're doing, and then telling them, this is what I see the places of improvement, and this is where they are lagging behind. So what can we come up with some collaborative solutions as to you and me working together to make sure they're practicing regularly. So that's the second thing. And the third thing was I created some virtual practice spaces, in that all my students were like from different parts of the world, and I thought I need to create some kind of an inclusive space or a bond between them, so that they can have those practice buddies, which I think I value so much. So what I did was I created these every morning, like 7:00 or so, we all used to log on to Skype, and I was there too. And then everybody was on mute, and they did their voice exercises and I did mine. So it was like we all are coming together, even if we are not physically together. We can make sure we are finding such moments where we are like, we can be with our guru, not just in the capacity of a classroom, but then outside of classroom. So creating things like that. And one thing that I've always loved from my teaching assistant experience when I was teaching math in university was holding office hours. So that's something that I've borrowed from that space to here. So with a weekly class, I would say these are my office hours in a week. So you don't have to wait until next week to ask me a question. So if you have a question, just pop up during these times, and I'll be there on Zoom or something, so you can ask a question and leave. So those are some things that I did try to make more.
And I think what you said, like inquisitiveness also cultivates passion, so being able to have that open dialogue with whomever you're learning from, and having that kind of learning environment, I think is really important, especially for people over here who maybe, again, might not have the cultural background or the knowledge in depth as much as someone living in India around that environment, to really learn about these art forms more and in a meaningful way. Sunny Bhai?
Yeah, these are, all excellent points. I think mostly everyone's touched on them. I think I have, for me personally speaking, I have adopted the teaching style, the methodologies, pedagogy of my own guru. And so I have really not done things too differently. However, living in the West, we are from a different culture. For my Guruji, he has such a hectic lifestyle, and he doesn't teach frequently, and a lot of, for me speaking, personally, I've been having many lessons online with him, and for the students that I've been teaching, and obviously because of the pandemic and with COVID, I've been teaching them, many of them, online. One thing that does I think I do probably a little bit differently from him is that, and for him, when he's teaching, a lot of the teaching is happening, I'm not even really playing my tabla, so to speak. It's him just reciting the bowls and, me picking them up. And with students here, that training can't happen at that same level. And so I've had to come up with a different method, which is, writing down the bowls and even coming up with a mechanism where they can understand the bowls a little bit better. And so I came up with a system which probably only I understand and probably only my students understand, but it's an abbreviated form of writing the tabla bowls. And for anyone else that would read it, they'll probably look at it and be like, "What is this?" It's like nonsensical and it looks cryptic, and but anyway, I devised this method just so I could relay this information a little bit faster for someone coming to me and learning. It's because it's like tabla is, you're learning the rules of the language of tabla, which is really an abstract language. It's a rhythmic language, and for someone who's grown up in the West to who can't they have difficulty speaking their mother tongue. Well, for many it's English, but if they're Indian, it's they have someone speaking an Indian language at home, and for them to speak an Indian language is difficult as it is. And on top of that, if they're having to learn pronounce tabla bowls and do bol parant, that's a huge challenge for many students that are born here and have grown up here. And so that's why I came up with this method, and I thought, if I could, make it a little bit easier for them to pick it up, rather than writing each, bowl, each syllable out, that could help them better understand and pick up that language. And so that's one thing I feel that I've done a little bit differently. But generally speaking, I've kind of like copied and pasted my Guruji's talim and taught that to my students.
Wonderful. So we are running a little over time, as do most Indian Standard Time events, as they're often called. So I'm just going to ask two more questions, and then we'll head over to our audience Q&A. So just a reminder to everyone joining us, please submit your questions in the chat. We will try our best to get through as many of them as possible. So my next question, let me see which ones I want to prioritize. My next question, which one do I want to ask? Let's see. I'd like to ask this one. So how do we navigate learning traditional knowledge systems in an ever-changing social and cultural environment? How does our relationship to being in the cultural diaspora shape that navigation? So I'd like to start this question with Sunny Bhai.
It's a good question, and I'm not sure if I'm the right person to answer this question, but I'll do my best. I think the whole thing about the cultural diaspora. I mean, I think I would kind of harken back to that question you asked about the challenges and the privileges. Really, how do we go about figuring out what is the best methodologies to teach given these privileges and given these challenges? And so it's not easy, but I think with growing up here in the West, there's students that who are having really a challenge finding the right teacher, fitting into the they're born into this culture, and also learning this tradition, which is in many ways it's a little bit ancient too, right? So I think it's to impart that knowledge to them, to teach them, it's not an easy thing to do. So I think maybe it'd be better if maybe someone else, Jai Govinda or Bageshree, would take on this question because I'm obviously not doing justice to it.
No, I think you're doing completely fine. Any answer, when it comes to these questions are valid, in their own ways. We all have our own perspectives and experiences with these. But yeah, on that note, Bageshree. Oh,
sorry, it took me a
there.
second to unmute. Yeah, well, you said the word ancient, and I think this is also gets at the heart of a lot of the discourse about classical Indian dance or music, is that they're not actually ancient. I mean, they come from ancient cultures, but what you practice now as a tabla artist is very 20th century. And same thing with Kathak, and I would say even with Bharatanatyam, that there's this notion that these are arts that are handed generation to generation, but they're very contemporary art forms. What you create as a tabla artist, what your guru creates is who you are, right? And I think that that's important also. These art forms have been used as cultural tools in the West, in the diaspora, as a way for people to connect with culture. I mean, it really doesn't make sense as a Maharashtrian girl growing up in St. John's, Newfoundland, to learn Bharatanatyam as a way to connect with my culture, because I'm not South Indian. I don't speak those languages, right? So the intention of these art forms has become very different in the diaspora, but you have to make sure that you keep in mind that they are living art forms, that they are, it's not some ancient canon. Yes, there are repertoire items, there are repertoire pieces even in tabla, but is to always be considering who you're teaching, who is in front of you, and how do you interpret that as a living art.
Yeah, I wrote down a point, but you already brought it up, which is it's a living art, right? These are all living traditions. There's this interesting syncretism between tradition and contemporary insights that come into play with these art forms. I feel like it's not a period music, right? So we're not playing the music of a specific century or anything, even though, like you said, there might be compositions which are attributed to being old. There are also many contemporary compositions which come out from both people, even over here, lots of people are creating compositions here as well. A lot of these forms are also improvised, or they have that element to them. So there's always that embedded contemporaryism. That's not a word, but I said it anyways. That comes into play with these art forms. JG, unmute.
Do not know what else to add to this. The only thing that I do that is very different from my teachers is that my teacher never let us record the classes, either on video, on a tape recorder, or anything. You had to take note in a book. With my students now, and with the new technology, I let them record on their phone, new step. I let them record on whatever gadget they have. And I also give them very good quality recorded music that I got professionally recorded in India. Now, coming back to a step forward that we have done, Bageshree, that bringing the curriculum to the mainstream. My school and a few other schools in Canada have now been supported by Heritage Canada and recognized by Heritage Canada. So there is Latapada School, Menakatakar School, myself, and maybe a few other more. And we are accepted on the same level as any contemporary and classical dance school in the world, which is a great step forward. So we are recognized that way. So maybe it's already a yay. Let's see if it provides some more opportunity for the presenters, because this is where we're lacking a lot, is that a platform for all those people who are trained under those professional programs to perform.
Yeah, I definitely relate to all of that, especially recording. Myself, now I'm getting better with understanding Braj Bhasha, but pretty much I don't understand anything I sing for the most part until now, because I never learned Hindi and being Gujarati. Being able to record the classes, at least for me, when I'm learning a Bandish, especially if you're going to India or if you're learning once a week, even over here from your teacher, if you're going only once, whereas in India, in a Gurukul system, you might be with your teachers all the time and hearing the bandishes all the time. It really helps to have recordings to reference, because then that also speeds up your learning process as a student. It's another really useful resource, that's easy also for most people to do. All right, so that brings us to our final question, which is going to be, is there anything you didn't understand from your teachers' perspectives that only started to make sense when you yourself became a teacher? So I'd like to start this question with Bageshree Tai.
No. It's a really simple answer.
Just a flat out no. All right. Well, there we go. We got our answer. I'll go next to Srividhya.
That's a great question, Akhil. I think one of the biggest lessons that I still cherish in my heart that I've gotten from my teacher, it sounded when I heard it, like always when I sang, she kept saying, take care of the Shruti, focus on the Shruti, focus on the Shruti. To me at that point, it didn't because I was still singing on Shruti, my Sapasa was correct. So I didn't understand. What are you saying? I'm on Shruti. I recorded myself. I'm on Shruti. But the more and more I grow in music and as I teach, I understand that music comes out from the depth of silence. And that Shruti is like the canvas on which you paint your music. So when she said focus on the Shruti, it was not just the mere sapas or your on Shruti aligned with Shruti or not. I think I understand it now more like really, really take those pauses, the meaningful pauses from which your music will make more sense to you. So I think that as I'm growing, I'm understanding that now.
I think often, there are multiple meanings that sometimes come into play in certain teachings that you can get from your gurus or from your teachers, and that's one such example. Sunny Bhai?
Yeah, I think one thing that's coming to mind right now for me, Akhil, I think, is that when I was young, and I think a lot of the students that are young, they do this. They just want to come in. They're so excited. They have all this energy, and they just want to play. Like for me, Guruji, when I first started learning from him, he would be like, focus on the bol parant. Learn to recite the language, because that's the key. Because there's so many the nuances of the language, and reciting the language, stressing certain syllables, the accents, where those things, that's what when you learn that's what you're going to be playing. And when I was young, I didn't really, I appreciated it, but I didn't appreciate it to the extent that I do now. And I think, and that's what I tell many of my students is, really focus on learning the language, practice your bol prant. I think 50% of your practice should be reciting the bols, and then the other 50%, at least in the beginning, it probably should be more than that. And so that's one thing that I've it's been a little bit of a challenge for me, because as tabla players, we're always so excited, and we want to play, and we want to be able to showcase our talent, how fast we can move with our hands. And when you see in the audience, you see people clapping and those kind of things, they all play into it, right? And so you get really excited as a tabla player, and so you have to be a little bit mindful of that too, right? So, and I think one of the things that I do appreciate now is that I've really had to focus on my own in my own self is just really working on the bold parent aspect.
Often I think time is like your best friend when it comes to these things, when at an earlier stage in how you're learning music, interacting with it, all these things kind of fly by, and like you said, you kind of focus on some aspects over the others, but then through time you just realize how more nuanced and complicated it all really is.
Right.
JG.
So my answer is also a no. No.
We have two no's, and also two
Yeah,
no's from
two no's.
dancers. I wonder if that's something to if there's something there.
No, I don't think it's just dance. I mean, even when I was learning from Binate or even Rajan Bhaiya, like whether or not you can execute something is a different thing. But there's never been a moment where I didn't understand what they were trying to teach. It's just, if you can do it that's a whole other level of practice. But there was no mystery. There is no mystery to this.
Yeah.
It's just practice.
Yeah. Well, wonderful. That brings us to the end of my questions. So we have about 15 minutes to wrap things up. So I'll get started with some of our audience questions that we've had come in. So Bageshree ji, this one is for you. So you spoke about your mom being exposed to Indian classical music in East Africa. So the Ali, who's also here helping us today, he wanted to know what type of Indian classical music existed at that time, what you were being exposed to.
Yeah, it's such an interesting story. And my grandfather, my mother's father, he left his coastal village, not village, it's a city, Ratnagiri, the west coast of India and Maharashtra, in 1929 to go to Uganda. And he was basically looking for prospects. Now, for coming from Maharashtra, there were Maharashtrians who went to East Africa, but it was mostly Gujaratis. And so my mother actually grew up mostly around Gujaratis, and he worked in the government, and actually he wrote a memoir that I translated with my mother a couple of years ago from Marathi into English. And that's how I actually got to know a lot about that time. From the 1930s up until the time that Idi Amin would have expelled the South Asians. Luckily, my mother and her family had moved back to India in 1958, 1960, so they avoided all that. But he describes how Indian associations had grown and cropped up. I believe that, even if we have nuclear war and we have to start all over again, there's going to be an Indian association and there's going to be Indian dance and music. Basically, you can always count on that in any corner of the world. I've gone to even like Aruba and seen Indian dance and music. Okay, so that is a very positive thing. But even in the 1940s, they had these sabhas, they had these gatherings. And so at that time, it would have mostly been film music and film dances, but there were a lot of, in the 1950s, there were a lot of film dances that were based on classical music, and dancers like Vaijayanti Mala were classically trained dancers. So there was one song, in fact, that she used to dance a lot, Radha na bole, na bole, na bole re, which is actually based on Bageshree, Rag Bageshree. And so they have videos of that time. It's such an interesting migration story. Like I said, that no matter where Indians go, they will do dance and music.
That's very well said. There are these institutions all around the world. All right, so let's go to our next question. How do you all instill the values of exposing? How do the respected panelists instill the values of exposing themselves to the arts they are learning in their students here? So how do you expose your students to what they are learning? Is there anything that you direct them to engage with over here? So feel free, whoever wants to go first. May go ahead. Yes. JG, unmute. You were unmuted already.
I was okay. Well, I encourage my students to take Carnatic music classes. Some of them are studying Natuvangam right now with an association in India. I encourage them to go see performances. I take them with me to see Ballet BC, to see contemporary dance, so that they also know what's going on in dance, not only in Indian classical dance, but in the other form of dance of this country. And for lack of watching live performances, I guide them to videos of some artists that I really respect and that I really like, and can be because of the way they perform, can be a special composition, can be a special thing to watch, sometimes maybe to notice something that they should not be doing. So I encourage that. And after Arangetram, I also encourage them to go away. I push them away. As other teacher will grab them, I say, please go. And I actually hook them with teachers whom I think under whom they will do very well. And some of them have gone to India and studied with other teachers. If they want to come back to me after that, if they feel that, you know, they miss me, then they can come back. But I really try to push them away so that they can see what they have been given. Because if they don't put it beside something else, they cannot see. So I think that once they go and they come back, they really cherish what was given to them here in Vancouver. Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah, that's wonderful. And I think also through doing that, like you're getting them exposed to that cultural environment over there, for them to learn in a very different space, to learn different repertoire, to experiment, to expand their knowledge. And I think that's a really important thing for teachers to have the capacity to do. Anyone else here want to answer that question? Yeah, Sunny Bhai?
Yeah, I mean, I just wanted to add, I think I also do some of the same things, refer them to watching videos. And, I think one thing that for me also, I have to do a lot of explaining besides the actual training that happens. I have to spend like just a few minutes doing a lot of talking, explaining to them, the historical context and all of these, about the tradition, and motivate them. And sometimes I think to myself, maybe I should be like a motivational speaker instead, because so much of the time it's spent, just trying to inspire and motivate the students to, just practice and just given the time constraints with a lot of students, going to school and doing, work or whatever it is, it's a challenge. And so, for me, I think I think it's important to do that though as a teacher, because it shouldn't just be about whatever I've taught, whatever I've learned from my teacher, whatever compositions, here they are. There's more to it than that.
Yeah. Yes, JG. Oh, unmute.
I was talking with the director of the dance program at Arts Umbrella, and I'm very impressed by the quality of the teaching they offer, and that their dancers go straight to Ballet BC to join the company. And her name is Artemis Gordon. And I was asking her, how do you achieve such quick result with your student? Her answer was a lot of talking. She didn't say more classes. She said a lot of talking.
Yeah, I think a saying that I've come across a lot in my learning is that, listening is 75% of your learning. 25% is the actual doing part. But listening, observing, and, digesting what you are listening to and observing forms a really big chunk of how you learn these art forms. Srividhya Di?
Yeah, I just quickly wanted to add one point, given that we're talking about values here. So I think with a teacher-student relationship, the student is basically like picking up even the littlest of things that you say or do, like implicitly or explicitly, like your dispositions towards a certain kind of music. So for example, I think long back when I heard somebody, I don't even know where I heard it, or I said, I heard something like Jian Sir, who was my guru's guru. He didn't sing Karara Priya Ragam. I don't know where I heard this from. And for the longest time, I had inhibition singing that ragam. I was like, okay, there's something about this ragam that would probably not suit me or something. But then, so when I trace back those thoughts, it's like something that I heard from somewhere. And when it comes directly, like information like that, like from a guru, for example, if I'm saying, okay, this music is good, or listen to that, I need to provide my reasoning. Or if I'm disagreeing with someone, I need to consciously provide the reasonings to my students that this is why I'm disagreeing, but you don't have to, right? So really being conscious of what kind of a disposition that I'm placing, or value that I'm placing in front of my students, and giving them the freedom that this is my opinion, but then you don't have to agree with me necessarily. So being conscious about that.
And like with any form of human expression, there is subjectivity, involved with it. There are certain things that can be monitored, that can be calculated, that can be assessed to a certain degree of a standard, perhaps. But given that it's an art form, it's a mode of expression, there is subjectivity. And as a teacher, like you said, it's important that that space is allowed for people to express their own opinions, to even refute what you're saying as a teacher, as long as it's done, with respect on both ends, from the teacher to the student and the student to the teacher. Anything else we'd like to add on this question? No? Okay, we have one more, and that is, do the respected panelists envision a day where there is no longer a need for students of the diaspora to go to India to round out their training?
I think I said something about this before, that I would still, and I think everybody would agree with me, that because it's that idea of mahal. And, even though there's the Instagram, the Facebook, all that, but I mean, just the level of artistry, it's not that it doesn't exist here, that there are not great artists, but I think we may come to a time where there's a lot more activity on a mainstream level, but it's, it would take, because there's so many other cultures as well here, right? But, India has this history from independence time of setting up institutions and festivals, and just so much activity that have allowed the greatest artists to flourish. And, it's just, there's something about, no matter how difficult it is going there, there's this underlying spirituality that comes with being on that land, and of thinking of all the great artists, all the great people of the dynasties. Nothing beats that.
It is a very different environment, and like you said, we're missing that mahal. I think we've said this in a bunch of different points, but that is lacking here. Anyone else want to add to this question?
Well, we certainly cannot replicate the beauty of the temple of Tanjore, of Madurai, who are from the 4th, 5th century, the spirit that is in there, the overall mood of the country. It's like learning flamenco and never going to Spain. There is something, that's the country of origin, that's the root. We might create branches here, but I think that ultimately one has to go and go see where the roots are from and experience it.
Anyone else? Yes.
I mean, I think one thing I just want to say, Akhil, is that I think it really depends on the student, because it's like, how serious are they as a student? If they just want to do this as a hobby, they don't, they're not that passionate about it. If they are passionate about it, then definitely I agree with what's been said already, that they must go there.
Anyone else?
Yeah, and I mean, just to add to that, there are plenty of people who pretty much live as they probably would in India. They live the same way here. and have not even been to India for several years, right? It's like it might as well be another planet. But if you look at their lifestyle, it's completely how they would live, like nothing has changed, right? So it really just depends on the individual if they have this sense of, I think there's a lot of dialogue here about connection with land and with a place of ancestry, that it's an individual choice. That I know for myself that even though like I was born there, but it's now been more than 2 years that I've been there, and years will go by, but it's like India or being Indian I'm never disconnected from it, even if I'm not there, right? So it really just depends on if you feel, but I think that even if I was studying vocal music or Kathak dance, I'm glad I did it when I did go to India, because I think it's a very different scene now. But I still think that, if you're learning flamenco, you have to go to Spain. It's the same thing.
Yeah, it helps to understand the cultural context of how these art forms have developed. Srividhya, do you have anything you want to add?
I think they pretty much summed it up what I had to say, because with Carnatic music especially, a lot of kritis, and it's built on those on that context of temples like Panchalinga kritis or Panchabhuta kritis. So it's really very important to know what these kritis signify, even in a metaphysical way. Like one has to have that, and that's why I said the kind of students, like Sunny Bhai said, it's the kind of student is very important, in that if you're not a little predisposed to philosophy, or if you're like really not passionate or curious about that, then it kind of it puts you on another front. Like you can just learn it atemporally, learn a kriti, sing it, and then go. But if you want to delve more into gaining that bhava from the kriti, what is it really trying to convey? Then you delve deep into that. At that point, nothing is, just going into a temple and then singing there, and with that acoustics, nothing stands in front of that.
Yeah, and I think this is also something that got touched on one of the last lectures that we had. Srividhya, you had helped moderate that, which was on some of Dikshitar's kritis, right? Because in some of his kritis, he actually describes the scene in the temple, right? He describes the architecture, he describes the ambiance, he describes the murtis of the deities in the temple. So again, like it's been said, where it depends on the temperament of a student. You might have a student who will go to those temples and they just won't feel a thing, and it'll just kind of like go over their heads. But you might have students who will really be looking for those deeper insights into the histories of these compositions or these art forms, and to understand how the way people live and the way people interact, and their lifestyle also fuels how these art forms have developed, and their inherent natures. So wonderful. That brings us to the end of today's sessions. I'm glad to say we managed to end it on time. So first of all, of course, I'd like to thank all of our panelists here today, JG, Bageshree, Sunny Bhai, Srividhya. It was wonderful because everyone, for the most part, had very varying things to say, very different opinions, very different perspectives, and I think that's important. In our initial call together, I had said that, it's important to highlight that there's no one way to practice or to teach these art forms. There are things that obviously tie them all together, certain things that do remain consistent, but again, given that these are art forms, they're various ways of human expression, and we all will interpret them in our own ways, and we'll have something to contribute ourselves as well to how they are disseminated. So I'd really like to thank you all for your time and for your knowledge that you've shared with us today. I hope that the audience has made the most of today's program. I'd also like to thank Ali Sundarji, one of our volunteers who has been here on the call with us, helping make sure that things run smoothly so that I don't have to worry too much. So thank you so much, Ali Bhai, for all of your help in that regard. I'd also like to thank Guruji, my Guruji, Pandit Arijit Mahalanabis. He helped me, just confirm some of the questions and the route that I wanted to take this dialogue. So I do help him for his assistance with that. And of course, the greater team at the Indian Classical Music Society of Vancouver and the Kalāvāṇī Institute, everyone who's helped with marketing and everything to get this event together. I'd also like to thank CreativeBC and the City of Vancouver. Due to their generous support, we have been able to host all of the programs that we've been having with this festival. So thank you so much. It means a lot to have your support for the dissemination of our artistic practices. Coming up next for our festival are our Drupad workshops. These are workshops that are designed to introduce people to the Hindustani vocal form known as Drupad. And this is taking place from March 14th to the 24th, every alternating day from 7 to 9 p.m. PST. We have 11 talented vocalists who have been selected to be trained by Pandit Arijit Mahalanabis and who will be performing at our finale concert. They have 6 days to put something together and to perform it, so it's going to be a really exciting next few weeks. And that finale concert is on March 26th. These workshops are still open to other participants who want to participate virtually. And again, these workshops are also free, like all of our events have been. So if you are interested in participating in these, please send us an email at info.icmsv@gmail.com. I'd also like to announce a few events that our panelists are involved with that are coming up soon. So the first one is on March 23rd at noon. David Trasoff, who is a Sarodhiya disciple of Ustad Ali Akbar Khan Sahab, will be performing with our panelists here today, Sunny Matharu, who will be on Tabla. So this is a concert that's part of the Wednesday noon concert series organized by the School of Music at the University of British Columbia. So if you'd like more details on this event, please visit Chan Center's website to purchase tickets. And the next event that is coming up is organized by Bageshree Vaze and her team at Pratibha Arts. Sadhana Tarana from April 7th to 9th is a multi-day program which features emerging and senior artists in Kathak and Hindustani vocal music. One of our vocalists here in Vancouver, a good friend Utkar Shakale, she's going to be performing at the event. So it's wonderful to see some local blood up there. So those of you who are in Toronto, you can enjoy the program live. And those of you who are not in Toronto, there's a live stream option that is available as well. So I invite you to visit Pratibha Arts, that is PRATIBHA.arts.com, and get your tickets and support these wonderful events. Just before we head off, we do still have a few costs that we are looking to cover for the Kalāvāṇī Festival. So if you are able to support this festival by sending us a donation, you can find that link in the video description. And also if you are a business owner or someone in the community who's looking to sponsor, please send us an email and we will send you our sponsorship package. And on that note, I would like to again thank everyone for being here today. And I would like to thank all of our panelists. Thank you so much for these wonderful discussions. I also learned a lot. And that brings us to the end. We'll see you at our Drupad workshops and our finale concert, on the 26th. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much.
I just want to add that I want to congratulate you for your Kalāvāṇī and your beginning and your endeavor. You're a young person, and it's really nice to see fresh young blood with such dynamism and with such an openness to create a place for music. So congratulate you.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Yes, onwards and upwards, Akhil.
Thank you.
We're counting on you to keep going with it.
Oh boy. I will. Don't worry. That's a good one.
And thank you for all the curating. Thank you very much, Akhil.
Thank you.
Just thanks for everyone who joined in today and watched us. Hopefully it wasn't too boring.
No, it was a very dynamic panel. I'm very happy with how things went, and our audience has been interacting a lot, so they're happy too. All right, thank you so much, everyone. Have a lovely evening. Take